Presented by The Hockey Shop. Source for sports, thehockeyshop.com. This is In Goal Radio, the podcast. Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Darren Millard. And today we are going to go halfway around the world to Sweden and the goalie guru of the Swedish Ice Hockey Association, Thomas Magnusson. This is a fascinating interview that covers decades of goaltending and a lot of names you may have forgotten a little bit about, but will come flooding back, and we'll also deal with how you train your goaltenders from a not just association level, local rink, your local minor hockey team, but also from a national perspective. Thomas Magnusson is a fascinating interview, and he catches up with Kevin Woodley as those two go back and forth. We will also chat with Goalie Gear Nerd. He is one of the social media's leaders as far as goaltending equipment is concerned. We'll give you an idea of what to expect in the year 2020 as we bring in the co-founders of In Goal Magazine, Kevin Woodley and David Hutchison. Hutch has been working long and hard getting ready for the holidays as he balances his work as both our father, our dad, and the editor. I don't know whether you're the editor-in-chief, but you're certainly our conscience. How you holding up? Are you keeping it together over there?
100%. I'm not ready for the holidays at all, but thankfully I've got a wife who supports me hugely. So the family's ready for the holidays. I've been spending all my time getting In Goal Premium rolling out, and we're really excited about what's been happening there. We've got all kinds of fantastic content on there, all sorts of insider pro content, and the memberships are flooding in, especially at the holidays. We set up a site so that people can give gift subscriptions and send nice messages to members of their family who are goaltenders, and just been great to welcome so many new people to the fold.
And the content is fantastic. Woodley, you're responsible for a lot of the stuff that's ending up on In Goal Premium. You happy with what's happened so far?
Yeah, it's been a little tough over the Christmas holidays, and I maybe picking a 10-game homestand for or a 10 home game month for the Canucks wasn't the best idea to roll it out. But thankfully, in addition to looking after us, and this is the hardest part for Hutch as our dad, is the children always misbehave at Christmas. And he's had to tighten the reins on me a few times here. Frankly, Darren, I may be gathering the material, but without Hutch basically going no sleep to produce it, none of this happens. So he's been just absolutely killing it. Between the two of us, we have had a fair bit of good stuff up there. And it's exciting. And what I'm really excited about is where it's going to go. You talk about year end and moving forward, 2020, because right now it's just the tip of the iceberg. The pro reads have been great. The gear segments have been great. We've got a lot of new features that we're going to roll out in 2020. And I'm excited to get back from a little bit of a Christmas vacation. The gear equipment, the content was still coming, but it's really going to pick up when we get back early in the new year.
Well, you know what? Gear, content, equipment, it's all the same thing. It all rolls into one. And you're right. Hutch has been doing double duty and keeping us in order. And he's just about to snap. So let's get right into this episode and make sure that we're ready to go and we're off and running. And if anybody wants to do that Christmas thing and you have not given the gift or found the right gift, the Hockey Shop, Source for Sports, thehockeyshop.com is a good place to start.
Absolutely. First of all, you got to get your In Goal Premium subscription. That's the first step. But then if you're looking for something a little bigger ticket, make sure you check out the folks at the Hockey Shop, thehockeyshop.com. If you're here in the Lower Mainland, visit them in person out in Surrey. That's where we go to get our gear. We're going to give Cam the week off from our gear segment because he's been working so hard, getting all the specials, all the latest gear. The best part about the new year is all the fresh stuff is going to roll in April. So make sure you check out the Hockey Shop and thehockeyshop.com for some of the sales on last year's gear that are going to start to appear here early in 2020 as they try and lean out the supplies before all the new stuff comes in for March and April. I've told you guys many times before, there's a reason you go to the Hockey Shop. It's not just a bunch of kids on the floor. It's goalies who know the position, understand the position, and will get you the gear that help you play the position better. That's why we shop at the Hockey Shop and thehockeyshop.com. That's why you should shop there as well. Looking for lots more exciting things with Cam and the crew from the Hockey Shop in 2020.
Yeah, you know what? A year ago at this time, we weren't even doing this. And now, 49 episodes in, 125 episodes in, 275,000 episodes in, we're rolling along. I'm just looking ahead to the future, trying to be like Cam and Goalie Gear Nerd and this incredible podcast that we have going with In Goal Radio, the podcast. We want to get to the feature interview right away, and this is an intriguing one because I know Thomas Magnusson, but I've never met him and been able to spend a lot of time with him. So the interview that Kevin Woodley conducts with Thomas is one of those real fly on the wall conversations. It covers everything from mentions of the old GP21, which Hutch and I both can relate to, the old Cooper gear, as soon as he started talking about that, all the way up to how you sharpen your skates and the relationship of skates and sharpness to hip injuries, and through the dilemma that we're all dealing with at both the kid level and the adult level of hip injuries. It covers a wide-ranging conversation. And Woody, just before we get to the interview, give us sort of your takeaway from it.
I honestly is kind of at a loss for words when it comes to talking to Thomas Magnusson. We've had the pleasure of talking to him before at different conferences. He's been the head of the Swedish goaltending for the Swedish Ice Hockey Association, as he said, like 12, 13 years. He's just one of those guys that has a passion for the position. You can talk goaltending with him for hours and always come away with new insights and new ideas every time you do. He really drives a lot of the innovation there. And what I like what he's done, and he'll get into it, is it's not all about him. It's about sort of, being at the top and overseeing and make sure that people are in the right place to have it trickle down to all the various levels through the club teams, so that his philosophy on creating better, don't worry about creating better goalies, just create better goalie coaches and the rest will follow. I mean, all things we get into in the conversation. There were so many good takeaways, and I think that's why Sweden has been on the cutting edge of developing goaltenders for a while now. And I think having guys like Thomas in charge of it are why they'll continue to be on the cutting edge of, not just building better goaltenders, but building healthier goaltenders through some of the studies they've done with the hip injuries and the groin injuries and all things we talk about in this conversation.
The model of creating better goaltenders in the nation of Sweden is one of the great takeaways from this interview. The feature interview on In Goal Radio, the podcast, presented by Source for Sports Surrey, The Hockey Shop, thehockeyshop.com. Here's Kevin Woodley with Thomas Magnusson.
Thomas Magnusson is joining us on the In Goal Radio podcast this week, live from Sweden. Well, I guess not live, we're recording it, but from Sweden. This is exciting for me. It's been a while since we've seen each other, a couple of years back in Nashville at the Network Symposium, and it's always good to catch up with you. I was trying to think of how to introduce you, and I was kind of just left with the godfather of Swedish goaltending. Is that cool?
That's cool for me. I've been known by several different names, but that's a good one.
Some people would even say the godfather of European goaltending. I mean, I was looking back through your record as a goaltending coach, and one thing that jumped out at me is like early 80s, Thomas. Like, in a lot of ways, you predated, we talk a lot over here about Francois Allaire being the first goaltending coach at the professional level with the Montreal Canadiens. So that's kind of 85, 86, but you started with Djurgården way back in 83. So maybe we've been giving credit to the wrong person in terms of the pro level. So walk our listeners through your history, playing and then into coaching and how you got started. It's a big question, but just give us a little bit of that background.
I played youth hockey and junior A in Stockholm in different clubs. A really local area club where I play youth hockey. And I actually went to the States to play a prep school hockey for 1 year, and then came back to Sweden and played junior A in one of the Stockholm we have this top to bottom system. So the pro team would have a junior A team, right? And I played for the junior A's of AIK, which is one of the Stockholm-based clubs. And almost at that time, I started to get into coaching. I started coaching youth goalies in my old club. And actually, I got introduced to goaltending coaching, goalie coaching, when I was in the States. I just coincidentally, I ran into Joe Bertagna, who was at the time a local goalie coach in Massachusetts. Later, he became the goalie coach of the Bruins. And I just, one of my first days in the States, I stepped into a local rink in Natick, Massachusetts, and there was a goalie session on the ice. And that really hit me that, you can do so much for goalies. So I actually got it from North America. Coming back home, I as I mentioned, I played 2 more years of hockey. And then I started figuring out, what should I do if I want to get into coaching, and specifically goalie coaching? And the best route for me would be physical education. So I went to college and majored in physical education. And after that, that was in 1983, I contacted one of my old coaches, who at the time was head coach of actually the Swedish championship team in the Pro League the year prior to myself asking him, why don't you have a goalie coach? And well, that was in 83, and I stayed on until 2005 with that club. So that was 22 years.
Just a little 22-year run there. Nice.
Yeah.
So what you've seen it all. You've seen the complete evolution of the game. I mean, I'm guessing when you played, what was the style like? What was the equipment like? And compared to now, you really have had a front row seat for the evolution of goaltending to where we see it now.
Yeah, definitely. At the time, we didn't see a lot of NHL hockey. We could see it in some clips and some movies, sort of. But no internet, no broadcasting from NHL. Actually, I got to see firsthand the Canadian team in 1972 on their way to Moscow. They played 2 games in Stockholm. So for
the Summit Series team.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was my experience of NHL level hockey. But actually, I was at the time I was 14 or 15 years old. I got to meet Ken Dryden and Tony Esposito, and I got some drawings signed by them that I had done, because my big interest in my youth was, arts and hockey. So I did a lot of drawings and stuff, and I got them signed by Dryden and Esposito. So I was very influenced by North American hockey, but this was before myself going there. The hockey I saw was our pro level here in Sweden, and of course the World Championships, where our goalies at the time, 2 of them actually, or 3 of them at that time, tried out for pro hockey in North America. The biggest one was Leif Holmqvist. He never made it. The most influential goalie in Swedish history is Kurt Larsson. He played for the Winnipeg Jets. And Christer Abrahamsson played for Hartford Whalers for a couple of years. Both of those guys in WHA. So that way we saw more and more of North American hockey, but our hockey here was on a lower level, especially on the international side. And you mentioned the equipment. The equipment at the time was, of course, the Cooper, the Cooper stuff. That was the GM12s and the GM21s, and the pads were the GP 95s. That's what I played in. The brown leather stuff.
Long before the age of landing gears and butterflies and pads that rotated properly. A different style of play for sure. How have you seen, obviously the game has evolved internationally, but from your side, before especially you had access to things like the internet and saw NHL games, they became more prevalent. Talking to guys like Marcus Naslund when he used to play for the Canucks, like when he grew up, they used to talk about a game of the week on late at night. And now, of course, probably a lot easier to access whatever you need on the internet. But how did that evolution from that older style with those pads and that stand up to what we see now in terms of a modern game, Swedish hockey, Swedish goaltending, from, like you said, just 1 or 2 guys getting a chance to come over to now being one of the places that the rest of the world looks to, not just for innovations, but for goaltenders who can play at the highest level?
Yeah, I think a lot happened in the early 2000s. We had a total makeover of our hockey in Sweden. I had already been doing this for quite a while, but the federation, Swedish Federation, realized we had a problem. So we had a big summit in Sweden for doing something about our junior programs. And at that time, in 2002, we gathered all the people in Sweden, connected it within hockey, the federation, the clubs, the pro system, the agents, the scouts. And from there on, we have been building our Swedish model of development in hockey in general. And at that time, we started also our program on the national level of goalie development. So we see it pretty much from there, from 2002 and on. That's when we really developed as a nation. But at that time, I had already been doing this for 20 years on the club level, and I was really surprised after about 10 years of development in the club system and tremendous success for our club team. No other teams in Sweden picked this up with goalie coaching. I was still the only goalie coach in Sweden, like 10 years after I started.
Wow.
But in the mid 90s, I would say it started to grow in Sweden. We had more and more goalie coaches. But when I started out in '83, we had the team that I joined had already won the championship the year before, and we had some less successful years. But then we had 3 straight championships in '89, '90, '91. Then we won another 2 championships in 2000 and 2001. And both of those times we had really, really young goalies that we brought up from our own system. The first period there was Tommy Söderström, who then later played for the Flyers and the Islanders, who was, I think he was the first European goalie who actually made it in the NHL from the start, not playing in the minors. So his first year in the Flyers, he played as a starting goalie without playing in the minors. And then the second round in the early 2000s was Michael Tellqvist. And both of those goalies came up in our system and won the championship when they were like 21, 22 years old and coming right out of juniors.
Yeah, Michael Telquist, a guy I've had the pleasure of talking to over the years when he was over here, and always enjoyed those conversations. You mentioned the summit, I guess, in 2002. The model that came out of that, for people that aren't familiar with the Swedish goaltending development model, can you explain that to a little bit? What are in your minds the keys to the success that it has created nationally and internationally for Sweden in the goaltending side?
Yeah. The Finns were way, way ahead of us to organize this on a national basis. So we looked at them for organization to see what they had done. And what we did was, first of all, I was appointed head of goalie coaching for the federation from 2005. And what we did at the start was building a program with a foundation of educational material that would be catered both for the goalies and for goalie coaches. And then implementing a certification program for coaches. Because in our system, we cannot do very much as a federation directly towards the players. We sort of lend them for our national teams, but they are developed in the club systems. So what we started doing was develop a core of goalie coaches. Starting in 2005, we have now 250 goalie coaches who have gone through our certification program of 6 different levels.
This is always something I love. Like, rather than as a federation, take it on yourself to try and build a bunch of better goalies, build better goalie coaches and let them build better goalies. You're going to have far greater reach than you would trying to do it all yourself. It seems to make so much sense. And yet, as you said, Finland was ahead. There's still some countries that haven't gotten to this point.
Mm-hmm. So that was the foundation, to have a program, to have a educational system for the goalie coaches, and being able to speak the same language directly to the goalies as well. So trying to simplify goaltending, so we could have the same language, the same foundation. But as I have found a misconception in North America of our program, it is not trying to implement the same kind of goaltending in every goalie. Simplifying the game, have a common understanding, a common language, which is the foundation to actually individualize, to work with each goalie from his or her assets, to build on their strength and develop each individual, because that's one thing I've always looked at. There are as many styles as there are goalies, right? There's no one style. I don't buy into the concept of butterfly style, because that's not a style. That's a way to make saves, or maybe even a stance. But to have a foundation of the technical aspects of the game, understanding of the tactics, then you can really build each individual to his or her potential.
We used to see it. We used to hear that a lot in Finland. They would talk about how each region you could identify, especially early on as goalies were coming over to the NHL from there, you could quite often identify what region they were from, because even though they had created a central sort of philosophy, there was that variation within regions. And it sounds like you're right. There probably is a misconception there that you guys are trying to build the same goalies all the time. Mm-hmm. That's what makes the position so great. There's no one way to do this. And it sounds like that's a part of your program, making sure that that's recognized and you're not trying to treat everyone the same, yet still having a somewhat of a common foundation. So you're on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you look at the goalies, you look at the guys right now with Lundqvist or Lehner or Markstrom, they don't look the same, right? And actually, I built this from I mentioned Thomas Söderström, a guy my size is in centimeters like 175 and a really lightweight guy. When he left for the Flyers, we brought in a goalie in this was in '93, who was like almost 200 centimeters and a really heavy guy. He couldn't play the same style as Tommy had done, so I had to treat him in a completely different way, and he had to play in a very different way. So already at that time, I really focused on the individual assets of each goalie.
The program and in terms of certification, and you mentioned 6 different levels, does it trickle all the way down to volunteer coaches as well, minor hockey, or is everybody sort of in a professional designation? Is it, and I know your system is different because everything is sort of comes down from a club level down within communities, but can you maybe help walk us through that? Because I think that's the one thing over here, at least, you end up in minor hockey with parents who are on the ice, and quite often they're just there as volunteers and they're not given that foundation, that even simple understanding where they can help a kid.
250 goalie coaches may not sound that much, but we only have 300 club systems with youth hockey in Sweden. So that get a perspective of that. And yes, as we started developing or educating goalie coaches, we also had the opportunity as a federation to put demands on the clubs. So as things grew from 2005 up until today, we have implemented new demands. So looking at it right now, if you're a club on the elite level, which would be our pro league, our second league, our women's league, our junior elite league, they need to have a certified goalie coach who has gone through the whole program. If you go down the levels, you go down to youth programs, they need certified goalie coaches, not on the top level, but on a mid-level. And then every youth club in Sweden are demanded to have a goalie coach who has been through the first part of it. So different demands on different clubs having hockey on different systems or levels.
Now, do you still all Does everyone still get together, whether it's once a year or once every couple of years, and share notes and compare and try and develop philosophies together, sort of a national, for lack of a better term, symposium? Is that still part of the program?
Yeah, absolutely. We have also, since we educated or had certified more and more coaches, I saw a need for, I don't know the English or English language term for it, but if you go through a program, you need a refill, right? You need an update. So we offer an update each year since 2012. So every once a year since 2012, we have an update that we offer to the coaches who have gone through the program. So actually, this fall, I did the 8th consecutive yearly update, and we have different themes each year. Sometimes we meet everyone in one place, like we did when we started in 2012. I always try to bring in as many of the top level coaches, but it goes all the way down to the youth program. So anyone is invited. And sometimes we do it regionally. Like this year, we did it in 5 different places. So we had about 170 coaches divided into 5 different places. So it's easier accessed for people in different parts of the country. Last year, we had one in one place, and this year we also had an extra meeting where we discussed just one theme, the hip issues in the goalie world. So different themes, different discussions, and the regional ones this year was actually based on youth goaltending, because we have a big makeover in Sweden this year that we work in our development program for hockey in general on the youth level to see that we, for example, should we play for the younger kids? Should they play full ice or half ice or cross ice? Should we have designated goalies when they're 8 years old, 10 years old, or 12 years old? So a lot of discussions along those lines.
So the game is caught. That's the thing about the position, maybe that I love more than the individuality of it, and how there is no one way. Is it is constantly evolving, and so that makes sense that you'd have to keep up with it on an annual basis. We always used to hear about the manual. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. It's Malkov, and I'm not even going to try, Thomas. You can tell I've seen photos of it. Is it still relevant? You still use that? Do you update that, or as the era has changed, as things like the internet have come on, do you need to have a hard printed manual anymore?
Actually, we use that hard printed one because of lack of time of updating, and the most important thing, we don't need to update it because. Also looking at the Finns, we saw that the game of goaltending was changing so much in late 90s and early 2000s. So I realized that we cannot do this so technically, so much in detail, because the details are going to change. So what I mentioned before, to simplify things, we talk about what is goaltending about? What are the general concepts, the understanding of goaltending? Not so much about the different techniques, because they will change. Of course, we have descriptions of the basics in techniques, but for example, we did this in 2006, 7, and 8. We don't have the reverse VH. That is something we have to add to it for the next publication, which will not be the binder. It will be a digital one on our website. And that should have been done like 3 or 4 years ago, mostly because we miss some parts like the reverse VH that, a lot of people here in Sweden do it, about it.
Yep.
Linda and the SMS. So there's no big need for it actually, because everyone is doing it and they know about it. almost the other way around. We have to downplay it, I think. But the big thing that needs updating is the pictures, because they grew old really, really fast. The equipment, the goalies, the names of the goalies. So yes, we need updating.
There's some are there some illustrations in? I've seen some pictures and it looks like there's some illustrations there that I think I've like hand drawings that I think I've seen before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's probably, I know what you mean. And I think that's almost one of few hand drawings. And that was copied from your buddy, Ian Clark.
It is that's funny. Yeah. Cause I know and I was curious, cause I know he spent some time over there and obviously, he's a guy that I have a ton of respect for, but I think, much like yourself, like he's one of these guys that's just immersed himself in the game so much. So did you have any experiences with him when he was over there?
Yeah, we met. I think I met him one of his first days over here when he was working for Modo, and they had a road game against our team. So we were in the stands together, actually, in the press box. But then I had the opportunity to join him when he was working with Modo and their goalie academy. So I spent 2 days up in Örnsköldsvik with him and the goalie coach at the time, Maciek Masken, and Magnusson, who then became the goalie coach when Maciek moved to another pro team. Yeah. So I spent time with Ian, and I think we have a lot in common.
I think I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall of that conversation.
Yeah. If I recall this right, we had the best conversation we had in the sauna.
Awesome, excellent stuff. Hey, you mentioned this year's theme of the annual gathering, not for lack of a better term, hips, and I did want to get into the hips because you guys have published, or Tobias Werner, if I'm saying it correctly, published a hip study just in the past couple of days. It wasn't why I reached out. We tried to touch base before, but you've been so busy with the NHL over there and running these conferences. The timing actually works out perfect, though. What'd you find in the hip study? And I think more importantly, because I don't think it would be a surprise to goaltenders that this is an issue. But what are are you starting to craft towards answers? And how do we solve this? I don't want to say problem, but seems pretty clear from the numbers in that study that maybe something needs to change for us to stop wearing out hips and groins, especially at a young age of these guys. What were some of the overriding themes of what you discovered in the study and how you see this moving forward?
Yeah. I found it was a big problem with hips and groins. And I noticed this is not a Swedish problem. It's all over the world. You see pro goalies, you see really young goalies having these problems, and they get surgery, which shouldn't have to be done at that early age.
I did a story. I was part of the research for the original Sports Illustrated story on this. This has got to be 12 years ago. And we were finding goalies as young as 12 back then in the United States having the surgery.
Yeah, that's awful. It shouldn't have to be that way, right?
No.
Yeah, so I initiated this study, and I found this guy I think was the perfect guy because he didn't really have a lot of experience in hockey, especially not in goaltending, but he grew really interested. He's a physiotherapist. He is a research guy, and he grew really interested in hockey as we discussed this, and he put his soul and heart into this. So he actually, for a full year, followed all the goalies in Sweden on our two top levels, pro levels, women's league and junior program. And the great thing about it was that through my connections with the pro coaches, with the leagues, we got a really good group of goalies who found this so important. So they stayed in this study for a full year. and we had a frequency of staying in the study of 85%, which is really fantastic in a study like this. So he had 101 goalies that he followed for a full year to answer the question: is this a problem? Because we've been talking about this for quite a while. I had discussions here in Sweden, and when I've been in North America, for example, with Maria Mountain and other people involved in hockey over there, especially on the physical side. And we know that there's a problem, but we want to find out, how big is the problem, because we need a starting point. We need a starting point to try to start figuring out how we can work this to prevent this from happening. And if we have a starting point, we can also in the future compare if we had any success in changing things.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And yes, the answer was definitely we have a problem. And the interesting thing here was that he didn't only look at time loss. When do we lose goalies to injury so they can't practice or play? Because this was also, do they experience problems in the daily life, and do they experience problems but they still practice? And I think that is what we found out is the biggest problem. We have so many goalies who have experienced problems in their hip and groin area, but they continue to practice. And that makes the problem even worse, right? So the problems we have, they are mainly overuse because they continue to practice and they continue to play. So if you look at the figures, almost 70% of the goalies experience problems if you look over a full season. And if you look at any specific time during the season and look into this group of goaltenders, almost 30% of them experience problems at each time of the season. If you look at the substantial problems which lead to time loss from games or practice, it's 35% of the goalies experience that sometime during a season. And anytime during a season, 10% of our goalie crop are out of practice or game. And that's not acceptable, especially since these guys who continue to practice, they build on their overuse symptoms and they get worse and worse, right? So this is a problem that is probably also growing over time. So what do we do? I think when I gathered now Tobias, Maria Mountain, who I brought over here, and a lot of our coaches and some coaches on various lower levels, and had discussions about this, I think what we agree on is we absolutely have to long-term look at the technical parts. Do we have to play? Should we play the way we do now? And that is the butterfly. Well, we won't be able to take that out. But could we practice it less? Could we have less repetitions? The reverse VH. Perhaps we could play it in different ways than we do now. Could we look at the equipment if we should? If we find out that the best way to play goal in relation to our posts, that is reverse VH. First of all, could we look at the equipment? Could we look at how many repetitions we have in practice? Because this is overuse, right?
Right.
And especially if we look at kids, because there are other studies in this field that absolutely tell us that the biggest onset of this problem is during the growth spurt, which is like 14, 15 years old.
Yep.
So that is the biggest problem. And looking at equipment, for example, should we have the same rules for knee stacks for 15-year-olds as we demand on our pro goalies in the National Hockey League because we want more goals scored? Is that, that's insane. So there are several things I think we should look at equipment-wise, but most of all, how do we practice on ice and how do we prepare off ice?
Well, I wanted to just quickly to touch on there because a lot of people won't, not everyone will understand the relation on knee stacks. Obviously, the higher, thicker your knee stack is, for those that are wondering why Thomas mentioned that, the thicker your knee stack is, the more you change that angle between hips, knees, and ankles, the higher the knee is. As long as the ankle is able to get to the ice, the less stress through that chain and into the hip rotation. So just for listeners who are listening to that, and obviously the NHL mandated a max, I think it was 1.5 inches. It was always in the rules. Most goalies were cheating. And when the NHL cracked down on it, I want to say it was about 10 years ago, we had a rash of groin injuries. And it was pretty clear that was the reason why. I've had this discussion with Maria Mountain before, actually when you were there at the Nashville Symposium put on by Network Goaltending. And I'm totally on board with that. The idea that young goalies, like, okay, we've got rules at the pro level. And as you age, if you have ambitions towards that, you're probably going to have to get to that smaller knee stack. But, maybe should it be thicker in younger goalies so we're not adding that stress at a young age? It's a great concept. It's one I've wanted to get into with her a little more. And it just seems to make a ton of sense, Thomas. I used to approach it like, well, if you're going to have to end up back at 1.5 inches anyways, is that a bad thing to get used to having more support? But if we're saving hips, it seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Why not practice with higher knee stacks, for example, if you think you have to do more repetitions than is what is good for your health, right?
Right.
And you should, I think it's really important that you take into consideration that maybe you have in certain time frames during your career, you need to build technical foundation, right? You need to practice a lot in these really, really bad angles of your hips and your knees, but not as much as we do now, I think. And it's really important that you prepare your body for being in those positions. And by preparing your body, you don't have to be in those different positions and angles. You can build strength at length, as Maria says, in very controlled fashions, not mimicking reverse VH, for example. Build your stability and your strength, not being in those positions, but preparing yourself to be in those positions when you get into a game.
You mentioned also practice habits. I think one of the things, and I've certainly written about it enough over here at the NHL level, like the amount of times the focus is often on the butterfly and the butterfly drops and how much of team practices really aren't doing much for a goaltender. So to put them in there and have them make all those drops when they're not really working on their game, they're basically glorified target practice, would probably add to it. But the one thing I did wonder is, as we have heard a lot of people talk about, hey, let's just focus on skating and less butterflies in practice. And anecdotally, because we know, I think the last study I saw, is it 4 times the body weight? That's how much pressure there is on the hips when you perform a butterfly drop at the highest level. So that's obviously not good for the hips. The one part I wondered, though, T-pushes, that hard, and I've seen it working at Hockey Canada last summer, the Quebec goalies, like the philosophy was hard push, hard stop, like literally what they were being taught, hard push, hard stop. And I cringed hearing it, just listening to the sounds of the starts and the stops, that heel kicking out so hard just to stop on a. So if you're skating that hard, is there, I've heard some rumblings about studies where I don't know if it's as much damage or pressure without the drop, but the internal rotation of that stop and that hard stop with the heel kick out can be, I don't know if it's just as damaging. I don't want to put the wrong words out there, but can be just as much, if not more, internal rotation in the hip as dropping into the butterfly. Like, is that something you guys are looking at as well? More skating, less butterfly might, if you're not skating properly, might not necessarily be the answer either.
Absolutely. What you were referring to is Ryan Frayne, who did this for CCM, and I follow that closely. I met Ryan also in Breckenridge with Justin Goldman, and definitely, I think that is as bad. That is actually one thing we focused on when we had this gathering for youth coaches now in the fall here in 5 different places. We are discussing the need for the T-push. In what situations do you need the T-push? And the T-push in itself, I don't think it's that troublesome with the push, but it's a stop. It's a stop when you're in full motion, big push, and then you rotate your lead skate to make that stop. That is the big problem, and especially if you have really sharp skates. And this is actually the first thing that Henrik Lundqvist changed in his game when he came to the Rangers, and that, well, what is it, 10 years ago? He had
inside edge high.
Yeah, inside edge high and really sharp skates. And they told him, maybe it was Benoit Allaire, maybe it was the physiotherapist, that you're not going to last for more than a couple of years in this league if you continue doing this. So he absolutely changed that. So it's nothing new, but it's brought to our attention now when we discuss the huge numbers in hip problems.
I never thought about sharpenings. Actually, when we talk about equipment, certainly how you strap your pad, some of the pad options. You mentioned the knee stacks. Just the other day I was talking to Craig Anderson, and he'd been switching over to Bauer, and he changed how he strapped around the knee, and he said, "Oh, I get into reverse VH, and there's so much less pressure on my hips because I'm wearing it looser at the knee." So how we wear our pads, how we sharpen our skates can impact our hip and our groin health for sure.
Absolutely. And I think there are some more things we could look into. I had a discussion about this with Ryan Frayne a couple of years ago too, because this has been an ongoing process. What about if we have something on our the back of our pants or on our outside of our pads that will not allow especially the kids we talk about, the 13, 14, 15, to get into that deep angle when they're in the reverse VH. You see what I mean?
Yeah, you can see me making faces. I picture it in my head. Yeah.
Try a reverse VH without equipment. You will get into a really, really bad angle, right? But the equipment we have now will be better for you. But it could be even better if we have some padding there that won't allow the goalie to get into the deepest crouch when down in the reverse. And of course, technically, we could discuss skate on post or toe box on post or pad inside post. And we could also discuss in what situations we use the reverse, because that is one of the biggest problems, I think, the reverse VH. And we have seen in our system the clubs that started out this process with the reverse VH and also did it, with a lot of repetitions. They also had the largest amount of problems early on in the process.
With hips, you mean?
Yeah, with hips. Absolutely. Yeah.
So obviously not a technique that's going away, but we can evolve how we coach it, how much we rep it out, how we wear our equipment, all these different things to take a closer eye at hip health. So what's the next step for you? Like, are you, in terms of this study, what's the next step towards trying to come up with some solutions?
I think we will see in the future, if it's next year or whenever it will be. I think we will have a follow-up study to follow up what's going on and see more because we need to have a closer look at what is the actual problem. Is it the groin? Is it the hip? And the hip is very, very complicated joint. So we need to have each goalie who has a problem has to be diagnosed. What is the problem? Because it's really hard to diagnose, right? What could be FIA or what could be a groin problem? What could be a hamstring? You need to take a closer look at each goalie to see
Right.
what is the actual problem. So that will make for a new study, and along that or parallel to that, we will absolutely continue the discussions on preparation off ice, how we practice on ice, the load on ice, how many repetitions in different age groups, and the equipment. So we will continue this discussion, especially here in Sweden with our group of coaches from our standpoint of the federation. And I will welcome anyone who wants to take part in that discussion. And I brought in Maria Mountain from your side of the ocean there, and
she's the best.
She's the best. Yeah, absolutely. We've had this discussion for I think it's 5 years now, Marina and myself. And one thing that we really looked into also is the neutral hip position.
Yeah.
Which is a long-term thing. We will not be able to do that with the goalies we have now. But if we start to implement that idea with the younger kids, and we will not be able to motivate them saying that, if you have a more neutral hip position, you will avoid injury. That is not motivation enough. But if we tell them you will move like Carey Price, if you have a more neutral hip position, I think that will motivate them. And side effect of that will be a healthier hip.
Yeah, the biomechanics of movement tied to the biomechanics of health. If you can improve efficiencies in both, you're going to get a lot more buy-in then. Because the 12-year-olds aren't worried about what their hips are going to like when they're 20.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. Hey, these discussions are fascinating, Thomas. Just catch me up on what is your what is the technical position? How should we, when I get Darren to introduce this after we talk, how do we introduce you now? What's your day-to-day like right now? What's the main focus and the main role? We're always having these big conversations about goaltending. You're always having these big conversations and big pictures, but what's your day-to-day? What's technically the job title? Tell our listeners what it looks like.
Well, I'm head of goaltending or director of goaltending for the Swedish Ice Hockey Association, which we also always refer to as federation, because that's people understand that better. But the official pronouncing our federation is the Swedish Ice Hockey Association, which is equivalent to Hockey Canada or USA Hockey. And my job description is overlooking everything that's connected with goaltending, which is what I mentioned with educational material, our certification program, educational coaches, but also the player side. So I'm head of a player development concerning goalies. So I appoint the goalie coaches for all our national teams, and I coach the coaches. So we have a common understanding of what we're doing in all our national teams. And for the past, I would say 4 years, my day-to-day work has involved more and more scoring. I say that not so loud. I whisper it, scoring. I think that's something that we can bring to the game of hockey. That we coach the players more about scoring, and I think one way why I think this is good, because it's better that they develop their scoring than they start or continue this discussion of bigger nets or smaller equipment. It's better that they focus on scoring. And also, when I teach or coach scoring, I learn more that I can teach my goalies. So I look at it from 180-degree position, and I find out, it's even more important that we coach controlled movement, being controlling your movement, so you can. Because when we talk about scoring, we talk a lot about shots against the grain,
right?
Crossing the
Slot line, road,
slot line, and shooting back where the goal is coming from. So passing or skating across the center line and then shooting back, and that is something we have to improve in goaltending. Since the players are getting better, and the shots are getting better, and the accuracy is getting better, so that puts higher demands on the goalies. So it works both ways. So it develops the game in both ways.
I never thought of it from the perspective of if the goalie coaches, because this is a trend that's happened over here as well, right? The Washington Capitals basically built their offensive plan around the advice of their goaltending coach and the analytics of Steve Valiquette and won a cup that way. But I never thought about it. Hey, if goalies, it was always that whispered, if goalies are helping create goals, it's going to help us avoid those larger nets. That's a great way of thinking about it. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
The reason that the scoring's finally up is they finally asked the smartest people in the room, the goaltenders.
Right. And also one great example is what happened in St. Louis last year.
Right.
When the new coach let the goalie coach
David Alexander.
Get David into the room and present scoring. So that was one important thing around their turnover of their season, when they were last in December and they finished first in the playoff.
Yeah, it's the old school coaches just tell you to get pucks to the net. The goalie coaches know that's not how you score goals. So they've turned to us to figure out how to score, and it's now it's our turn, like you said, to also combat it at the same time. So that's awesome stuff. Thomas, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate this. One of these days, going to have to get out there to Sweden to watch you in action. I know our listeners, our audience is going to really eat this conversation up, and I've enjoyed it as well. So we'll have to, as the conversation continues, as the research goes on, we'll have to stay in touch, because I know people will want to hear your voice again. It was really enjoyable. Thanks.
My pleasure, Kevin. And I really enjoy listening to your podcast. So this one will be just another one for me to listen to.
Oh, thank you very much. That means a lot coming from you. Thank you very much, Thomas.
That end of the interview, that's pretty cool. When he says he listens to the podcast all the time, I'm not going to be too cool not to pretend that didn't mean something.
Well, hey, listen, we said at the beginning, like, he really is the godfather of goaltending, not just in Sweden, but in Europe. Like, he actually predates Francois Allaire in terms of being a professional level goalie coach working for a pro team. He also predates us, Darren. They've had a podcast going in Sweden, a goalie specific podcast. Him and Stefan Lahti, who runs the World Championships team as the goalie coach for Sweden. They've had that going long before we started. Every time I see a tweet about a new edition of their podcast, you can hit translate tweet on Twitter and you can read what it's about. And I get really bitter that I can't just hit translate podcast, because I would love to listen to those conversations. It's been really popular in Sweden. Unfortunately, it's in Swedish, so we can't listen to it. But not only did he beat pretty much anyone to professional goaltending coaching, he beat us to the podcast.
The different innovations and the depth of which they've taken the art of goaltending and the effect of the goaltending position on the body is really intriguing. Hutch touched on a number of different areas, but the hips certainly dominating everybody's focus right now.
Yeah, for sure. The interview for me just started when he talked about the old gear, because I'm sitting here staring at my Cooper GP21 Trapper that is the best Christmas present I ever received as a kid. I can still remember getting that pro level Trapper that Dryden was using when I was probably about 12 years old, far too young.
Did you oil it? Did you oil it when you broke it in?
Mink oil. Yep. Mink oil.
Yeah.
Yep. And and then I remember I've still got the Velcro strap on it that I put on when I first saw Palmateer wearing one around the wrist too. So loved the setup to the interview, but you brought up the hips, and absolutely, I'll put my goalie parent hat on And we'll tell you that I'm going to start experimenting with some larger knee stacks for my kid just to see if we can take some stress off the hips. And he also wears very sharp skates. So a lot of food for thought. Nothing I hadn't heard before in some conversations with Kevin before, but it's great when the Godfather brings it up. You really start to listen, don't you?
Did he just say that he listens to Thomas when he says it, but doesn't listen when Kevin says it?
Well, Kevin
that
talks
what
so
I
much,
heard?
sometimes I just sort of tune out and it's hard to really focus in on what I need to listen to.
That's fair.
I'm not arguing.
What's
I'm
going
not
on?
arguing.
Yeah. So we have 2020 right around the corner, and it's not the actual calendar that the goaltending world works off of, but rather a couple of months later when a lot of the new gear is going to come out. We're going to see some of it at the World Junior Championship and get a little bit of a sneak peek, but we won't really, those of us in public circles aren't going to be able to get our hands on it. But Woodley and Hutch are both ahead of the curve, and Woody reached out to our friend via social media, one of the industry leaders on the platform of Instagram, Goalie Gear Nerd, to get an idea of what's in the hopper regarding goaltenders. Woody.
Yeah, and we started just talking a little bit about we kind of went over the trends that we liked in 2019 from a goalie equipment standpoint, and a lot of them are, finally we're getting some pro level options, custom options that weren't necessarily available before to retail for Joe Blow and the beer leaguers. And so we went over some of the things that we thought were the best trends of 2019 and looked ahead to 2020. It's a fun conversation with our friend. I wasn't sure what to call him though, like Goalie Gear Nerd, Mr. Nerd.
Yeah, I know.
So I kind of stumbled on that a little bit, but I just kind of called him Mr. Nerd and we went from there.
I like Mr. Nerd. It's very formal.
Mr. Nerd, Senior Nerd.
Yeah, and if you've ever met him in person, he's a pretty formal guy, so I think Mr. Nerd works.
Graphics, skates, and composite sticks with Woody and Goalie Gear Nerd.
We are pleased to welcome to In Goal Radio Podcast for the first time ever, probably long overdue, Goalie Gear Nerd. Do I call you Mr. Nerd, just Nerd? And I say this with all the respect in the world. I think one of the badges that I wear with honor was once when Johan Hedberg, goalie coach, former of the San Jose Sharks, said he called me a geek, and he said that it was meant as an endearing term. So how do we go here? Just nerd, gear nerd? How do we do it?
Yeah, you can call me whatever you want, Kevin. Sincerely, gear nerd or whatever. I'm pleased to be on. Obviously, a longtime fan of everything you all do at In Goal. So really excited to be on with you.
Well, we thought it would be perfect to have you on, Mr. Nerd. We'll go that way. Well, we thought it'd be perfect to have you on. It's the end of the year. Everybody's doing their top 10 lists, wrapping up, the top saves, top trends, top stories of 2019. And who better to talk to when it comes to trends in goal? And we wanted to have you on, look back at what you thought were the top trends in 2019. What are some of the things you're looking for in 2020? So I'm just going to open the floor. What do you see as you look back on 2019, a big year for goalie gear? What are the ones that jump out at you as the top trends for, especially on the consumer side, the stuff that you and I can access, and all our friends and fans that love the position can access at retail?
Yeah, that's perfectly put, because there is the two worlds that kind of exist, and it's what we see that is happening in the NHL, and then what it is that us beer leaguers can go to our favorite retailers and pick up. And there has been a disparity at times between those two worlds, but the big companies kind of help bring those together a little bit more this year, in two really meaningful ways. So from a graphics perspective, Bauer launched their True Design program later 2019. And what that did was it gave all of us the opportunity to actually purchase and create our own custom graphic Bauer gear that leverages their digital printing technology. And they're really the only ones that are doing this digital printing to this level. This was something that they've taken years to refine. And the real difference maker here is the fact that this digital printing really opens the doors in terms of graphic customization to levels really not previously seen. Traditionally, the way you do custom graphics on goalie gear was layering Gen Pro and synthetic leather on the face of a pad in such a way to create an image. And that could be really beautiful and rich, but it also is a little bit limiting in terms of what you can do. So from the types of colors that Gen Pro comes in, the amount of layers you can put there, there are certain limitations of what the digital printing allows for. Because that imagery is actually printed into the material itself, you can get greater detail. Really, the amount of colors is much more vast, and the complexity of the imagery is increased. You can create really sharp images, but you also can do really kind of faded and subtle images. So you can do things like shadows and really kind of great color gradients, things that imagery and graphics that you really can't do when it comes to the traditional custom graphics. So that's been really exciting. And as we now are able to get our own true design sets, and you've already seen some really incredible ones out there. And you don't have to only be a pro to get access to this. Now all of us can get access to this program. So it's been a lot of fun to see.
To me, one of the cool parts was seeing Henrik Lundqvist sort of make his look, that his set of True Design Bauers, it's kind of become iconic, right? Like that's him now, that the Statue of Liberty design that they came up with. What's your favorite from this past year? And there's been so many good ones.
Oh, that is a fantastic question. That really kind of put me on the spot, but I love it because you're absolutely right. Lundqvist has been able to create kind of a design. It used to be you would create kind of a graphic motif or icon for yourself with your mask painting. You think of Belfour, you think of Potvin, and Lundqvist with the Statue of Liberty, and he's be able to actually then move that into his gear, which is so cool and has a lot of different variations of those themes in his Bauer gear. I think some of the best setups we've been seeing, though, quite honestly, having the stuff you see at the major junior level, at the college level, those are really the levels that I've always said have some of the most creativity in terms of their graphics. So there is a variety of really, if you want to see some great ones, go look at what's happening in major junior. It's just some amazing images and graphics that these kids are coming up with because they're really willing to be aggressive. I think there's a gentleman who plays for, his name's Eric, and I'm going to butcher his last name, it's Portofillo. You might probably pronounce it better than I can. He plays for the Fighting Saints, and he's also playing for Team Sweden in the World Juniors, and he's got that set of armor imagery on his gear for the Fighting Saints, and he's got a beautiful Team Sweden setup as well. And those are probably two of my favorite True Design setups. So it's not just the pros now that have those amazing True Design setups. Other players do, and now you can actually see them at your local rink, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, and I've been remiss. I haven't told, not that our listeners they all know who you are and where they can find you, but you had that set. To me, that Sweden set is one of the nicest ones I've seen. Just the richness of the graphic. It's sort of the simple Tre Corona, but the way like you talked about all the background, you had it up on your Instagram and on your Twitter. Of course, that's at Goalie Gear Nerd. If anybody needs to, everybody should know this by now, but go check it out. That was one of the best ones. What are some of the other trends you've seen? Especially as we talk about, that the bringing pro to retail.
Yeah. So the other area has really been skates. Now you've been able to get custom skates as of last year with True. True obviously acquired VH, and VH really came in to the goalie skate market at the pro level and quickly took over the majority of the market share. And True, who now owns VH, still has that majority market share of pros in their custom boots. But this year, what we've seen is Bauer and CCM also launch programs for custom skates with really compelling products. And for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to get custom skates, you literally go to a retailer and they scan your foot, and the boot of the skate itself is created into those exact measurements. And obviously, for goalies that have unusual feet, this is a huge relief because the hockey skates are some of the most unforgiving types of footwear you can own. But even for people like myself who have relatively normal feet, the performance differences between custom boots and a stock boot are pretty profound. Obviously, all of our movement as goalies derive from our foot in the skate and the blade meeting the ice, and really that custom fit eliminates any lag. You get just that enhanced feeling and drive and performance, all while you're wearing a much more comfortable skate. So with Bauer launching the My Bauer program for their custom skates, CCM launched Total Custom, and they also came out with their first cowlingless skate, the FT2 Jet Speed. It's a great skate as well. Really two new compelling products. So now when you go to a retail, you have several options for your custom skates, and bringing that to all of us is really a big difference maker in my opinion.
Yeah, I know we've had lots of positive feedback on the FT2. from testers that have tried just a stock one. And personally, I was lucky enough to be the guy that got fitted from the in-goal crew for my own custom. And it's kind of just like putting on a slipper. I remember the first time I put it on and then took it off, and there was sort of like that suction cup sound as you pulled the heel out, that sort of that little pop. And it was like, ooh, that is fitting snug. But snug in a good way, not in a bad way. So I'm with you on that one. The expansion of custom skates has been that's a big one, especially once you've stopped growing. Maybe a little tougher for the kids who are growing real fast, but once you're into, you know what your size of skate is, I don't want to say it's a must-have, but for me, it would be from this point forward. The other one I want to talk to you a little bit about is sticks. I wrote an article on NHL.com. I've written it. I think I wrote it 2 years ago, and we saw an increase to composite, and now it's like pretty much almost all composite. Talk about that trend away from foam core at the NHL level, and how we're going to see that continue down to retail.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I definitely encourage anyone who hasn't read Kevin's article. It is the best article. It's really comprehensive, kind of on the topic. But that is a trend that has been identified for a while, and it's continued to this season. And you're seeing really foam core is going away by the wayside. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think from a logistical perspective, a lot of the companies are either like with Warriors shutting down their finish, foam core stick maker, and some of the other consolidations been happening in Canada with foam core stick makers. It's more difficult to produce, but also from the pro perspective, really them being understanding and seeing the benefits of composite more and more and more. Pros tend to be very reticent, and you know more than I do, Kevin, given your level of interaction with them. But pros tend to be, they're very stubborn, and I mean rightfully so to a point, because they've gotten to the highest levels of the game wearing the gear that they have on. So they're reticent to change anything. And again, I can understand that. But as composite has been out for so long, now they're already seeing the benefits. So you've got people like Bobrovsky this year that finally has moved over. And I thought he'd be one of the very last to move over to a composite stick. He has now moved. And then you've seen a number of others, Stalock, Georgiev, have all moved over out of foam core and into composite, and the companies are doing a really great job of kind of explaining the values of composite over foam core. The consistency is better, stiffness, weight, a variety of different things that make it superior to foam core, and are doing things for people like Alex Stalock and Bobrovsky, being able to give them custom handles at the top of the paddle, so that they can at least have a similar grip to their previous foam cores. So to make that transition just a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one for us at InGoal with the new InGoal Premium product. We've been in the room a lot going over sticks and how guys tape sticks and why they have certain custom grips. And so we'll definitely continue to roll that out. We had fun with Malcolm Subban. I mean, everything from spray paint to baby powder on his twigs. So there's some fun little insights on why guy tape it, why they put trigger grips in there. And you're right, it's interesting though. I will say this. You're right. The companies have done a good job of getting these guys on board with composite. But a lot of the guys, the reality is the first switch was as foam core, there was less and less of it available. It became harder and harder to maintain consistency and quality in the pro product of foam core because you just didn't have as many to choose from to basically get the good wood, so to speak. And so as guys got frustrated with that, what they liked about the composite is they switched, and it took time for them to switch, but you know, the consistency from one to the next, there is no difference from one batch. You're not worried about a good batch, a bad batch. And that is something that it started to happen more and more often on the foam core side of things. So guys at the NHL level really start to dig that consistency. And the next trend, and we had Adam Gans from CCM on talking about this, to me, the next trend, and it started with eFlex 4 stick. And we saw this in the foam core. Warrior was sort of ahead of curve on the foam core side. I think CCM is there with their eFlex 4 stick. The idea of different stiffnesses in the paddle, different flex for different shooting profiles, and talking to Adam when we had him on the podcast, it sounds like we could get to the point where goalies can be like players. You know, I want an 82 stiffness with a low kick point, and that type of individuality in terms of guys' preferences for shooting the puck. Maybe, you know, talk about custom and the trend towards custom. That could be what's next in goalie sticks.
I think it's a fantastic point, and it does seem a tad counterintuitive, doesn't it? Given how dialed in goalies are into their gear that really up into this point and until recently and only the pro level now, and maybe we'll see this, as you said, maybe available to Spear Leaguers in the future. But the idea that we still have to, we can order a custom set of gear, custom graphics, but we have to basically pull a stick off of a shelf that has exactly the same specs as the one to the left and to the right of it, is a little counterintuitive. So yeah, I think that's very possible that will be something that in the future we'll see.
Well, especially if I start telling the goalies that they're behind the shooters on anything, because they don't like to be behind the shooters on anything.
No.
Okay, what are you looking for in 2020? We've hit 2019. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming out. We won't get into this is part of the gig for you and me. We're on the inside. We know what a lot of this new stuff is going to look like. Obviously, a lot of excitement over CCM access. We won't get into tech spec. What about just general overall trends as the innovation continues at the pro and retail side? What are you excited about for 2020?
Yeah, it's gonna be a really exciting year, and it's really two things: it's innovation and masks. And I think innovation in the sense of performance. Really, all of it, and again, we can't go into specifics, but really all of the companies this year are coming out with really compelling products from an innovation perspective. As is expected, certain years when you introduce a line and a new line, and you have then a subsequent iteration, it's really subsequent iteration can be going back and really fixing all the small things that you kind of learned in the 2 years that product was out. So the second iteration is an enhanced version of the first iteration. This year isn't that. 2020 is going to be a truly kind of innovative year in terms of what you're seeing in the gear. A lot of time thinking and research, and that's a big thing a lot of the companies have been talking about, the level of research that they've gone into to develop these products. You're going to see some really compelling products this year from an innovation perspective. And then for masks, this is, I think, also going to be a big area in 2020. Really, a couple of years ago, it was very obvious that there was a significant concussion problem happening in the NHL and really kind of at all levels of the game. And it takes these companies, 18 months to 24 months to really dive into a product and start developing it before it hits the shelves. All of them have taken that information very seriously, really poured a lot more time and effort into their mask designs. And a lot of them, most of the companies this year are bringing out really the fruits of that research in 2020, trying to really enhance that product and make the position as safe as it possibly can be.
No, we got a lot of people that are going to be listening like, tell us what's coming. Don't worry, folks. We will, all in due time. It's still 2019. There's plenty. It doesn't come out till April. Some of it may. There's plenty of time. Make sure, of course, I'm going to say you got to keep it on ingoalmag.com and the new premium product, but make sure you check out Goalie Gear Nerd at Goalie Gear Nerd on Twitter and Instagram. This guy's on top of everything as well, knows his stuff. And as much as we like to say, check us out, check him out too. You'll see all the latest stuff as soon as you can. Not a competition. We kind of work hand in hand. He does a great job. We try and do a great job, and it's peace, love, dope as we head into the new year. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today. We're definitely going to have to get you on a little more in the near future. Dial into your expertise as some of these new equipment lines start to launch in 2020. Mr. Goalie Gear Nerd, thanks so much for joining the In Goal Radio podcast.
Kevin, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Mr. Goalie Gear Nerd, Senor. Did I cover my bases there? That was fun, Woody. Nice job.
Yeah, no, good guy. We met him once at CCM in Montreal a couple of years ago, and yeah, he's we'll have him on a little more often.
So we've got knee stacks. That's what Hutch is going to work on. Anything that you yourself are going to focus on as we transition into 2020 on your gear, Woody? I mean, there's a couple of different things. I would like you to maybe add a dangler. That's not too much to ask, but what are you thinking for your gear in the new year?
Truthfully, and I think this isn't a trend we talked about, I'm thinking about chopping an inch off the top. I'm thinking about ordering some of our custom stuff in a smaller size. Had this conversation with Freddie Anderson when he was in town about the inch he lost on his gear. I mean, the guy's 6'3", 6'4", and he's basically wearing like a medium pad, and how it reduces some of the interference. And we went back and forth quite a bit on it. I do find myself when I play in taller equipment, just naturally widening out my stance. And as soon as you widen out your stance, you lose mobility. You get locked in a little lower and wide. When we had our Brian's Optic 2 set, they came in a 34+1, and I'm traditionally a guy who orders our stuff in a 34+2. There wasn't that long ago, Hutch. Remember, we'd order stuff in like 34+2.5 even, trying to get that maximum thigh rise. And I find now, going to that 34+1 for plus Brian's, and hey, the reality, guys, is like at the NHL level, nobody's got pluses anymore. Like with the new sizing charts, nobody has pluses. And when I see a guy like Freddie Anderson actually chop the height of his pads and make them smaller on purpose and talk about the increased mobility and then just having to kind of feel like I felt better in it myself, I'm absolutely going to give it a try in 2020.
So if we jump the shark with big gear, have we, between the National Hockey League and Hockey Operations and Kay Whitmore and the work that they've done, that now goaltenders are doing it themselves when it comes to large gear?
Well, that was the point that Freddie made. Every time they cut the gear, they got better. Right now, maybe not so much the chest protectors. I don't think the goalies were super, super happy with that one last year. But look, when they went from 12 inches to 11 inches wide, mobility increased. And I do think that there are some... Listen, the game's never been faster laterally. Stephen Valiquette told us, I think it was 1,300 more plays across the slot line last year compared to the season before. Teams are specifically targeting it. It's not happening in my beer league, obviously. It's just always wide open left to right. But as you have to move left to right, if your gear is playing a role in widening out your stance, and Thomas talked about wide and sharp skates and getting locked in low, it limits your mobility. So shorter pads can increase your mobility, especially if you're wearing ones right now that are long enough that the top of the thigh rise interferes with one another as you move. So to me, it's something that's at least worth checking out. That Freddie Anderson guy's having a pretty darn good season playing in shorter pads with the Maple Leafs.
Higher knee stack, shorter pads. What a concept. And mobility improves, and your health should also go along with it. We look and we'll follow that trend as well and see what is the next RVH that lies ahead. That next innovation in stopping technique or save technique that is around the corner, because we always know there's innovation around every corner. For Kevin Woodley, David Hutchison, I'm Darren Millard. Happy holidays, everybody. Be safe, be happy, and make sure that you're stopping every puck that you can.